it was something. It was frightening because I walked in and, like you said, there was no one else that looked like me. And we had a tour of the facility, which was amazing. And at the end of it, they took us to Wixon Hall, which was the original winery on Davis. And Chuck, who was the cellar master, pulled out a couple of thieves and started tasting. And, people were throwing out words like Grenache and Tempranillo. And I'd never heard of those varieties. I mean, I knew Cabernet, Shiraz, and Chardonnay because that's all that was being written about in the magazines in India. So I went home pretty crushed that first evening because I was just like, what did I do?
Welcome to the Italian Wine Podcast. I'm Cynthia Chaplin, and this is Voices. Every Wednesday, I will be sharing conversations with international wine industry professionals, discussing issues in diversity, equity, and inclusion through their personal experiences working in the field of wine. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe and rate our show wherever you get your pods. Hello, and welcome to Voices. This is Cynthia Chaplin, and today I am so excited to welcome Priyanka French to Voices. In May of this year, Priyanka was named general manager at Napa Wine Company and winemaker at Ghost Block Wines. She was named to Wine Enthusiast's Future 40 in 2023, and she is a vocal advocate for diversity and inclusion in the wine industry, which is why I love her. She serves on the board of directors for Wine Unify and is the mentorship program director for Women in Wine at Batonage. So I'm so happy to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Cynthia. I'm very excited to be speaking with you today as well.
Well, first of all, you are so young. You've done all this stuff. I feel ashamed of myself. Let's get some backstory here. I know you grew up in Mumbai and you got your bachelor's degree in technology and food science there, and
Mhm.
you went to work for Nestle. And I don't see any wine in that story at all. So, how did you get into wine and end up in California?
It's actually, it's a funny story because I didn't grow up with wine. Wine was never a beverage of choice around me. So sometimes I think back to how it all started, and kind of just one of my life mottos has always been don't think, just jump, and that's kind of how it happened. So when I started food technology and studying that, it was a relatively new field in India, and it was a time when India was starting to see a lot of foreign investment in that field. So big multinationals like Unilever and General Mills and Nestle, they were all coming in. Coca-Cola had started a big manufacturing plant. So it was a kind of bustling field, and that's how I got into it, more for the love of the subjects than a real understanding of what the industry was. And I worked at Nestle with chocolate, and that was fun, but just didn't feel. Yeah, I did quality control too. So I can't eat Kit Kat anymore because once you've eaten it fresh off the line, the whole unwrapping process, it just takes it away. But I just, yeah, it was fun, but it didn't feel like something I wanted to do for a life decision. And thereafter, all of the other opportunities and experiences I had just kind of felt a bit limiting. And one of the field trips that we did was to Sula Vineyards, which is currently one of the bigger wineries in India. And so a huge part of that experience was that we visited the winery during harvest. So I got to kind of see a little bit of the harvest action. There was such a wonderful aspect of being creative with the product and not just from a food engineering. Food engineering is really about streamlining and making a consistent product. And I think that's where my lack of excitement lay, was I just didn't want to rinse and repeat. And so wine just seemed like something different and unique. And I just don't think just jump. I just jumped right into it.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. I have to say, tasting Kit Kats for a living doesn't sound like a bad job, but I can see where it would probably get a little boring after a while. And wine is never the same 2 years in a row, so I understand the attraction. It's great because you were the first Indian national to receive a Master's of Science in Viticulture and Enology from UC Davis in 2011. So pretty recently in the scheme of things. Um, what was it like being a young female student from India at UC Davis, 15 years ago? It's not easy to, sort of succeed and find your path when nobody else in the room looks like you. How was it for you moving all the way there and going through that?
When I left home, and when I made this decision and I said I'm gonna go in and do this, there was obviously a lot of excitement because it had been my choice, but uh, I didn't necessarily have the full support of my parents. So there was a bit of a stress of needing to kind of meet their expectations, which their expectations were whatever you do, just do it well. And that's kind of always been the mantra in my house as well. And so when I left the country and I kind of landed in the US, I was kind of brimming with excitement just at the unknown and the fact that I was on this journey of exploration and going to learn something completely new. And then when I got to Davis, the campus is amazing. There's a wonderful history when it comes to the academia around the wine industry. Some of the professors that I got to interact with are legendary in their field. I was still there when Professor Linda Besson was there and Professor Roger Bolton and Andrew Waterhouse. So really kind of that amazing group of professors that helped define Davis. But my first day was it was something. It was frightening because I walked in and, like you said, there was no one else that looked like me. And we had a tour of the facility, which was amazing. And at the end of it, they took us to Wixon Hall, which was the original winery on Davis. And Chuck, who was the cellar master, pulled out a couple of thieves and started tasting. And, people were throwing out words like Grenache and Tempranillo. And I'd never heard of those varieties. I mean, I knew Cabernet, Shiraz, and Chardonnay because that's all that was being written about in the magazines in India. So I went home pretty crushed that first evening because I was just like, what did I do? Kind of young and impulsive. But my roommate said to me, she goes, I think you just owe it to yourself and to your parents to stick it out for a month. And if you can't, and after a month, if you say I can't do it, then at least you've given it a real shot. And so I thought she had a point. And then the next day we had our first classes, which was wine chemistry. Professor Sue Ebler was known to be, a kind of a more stricter professor, and she was talking about molarity and chemistry, and I could follow along. And I just, that kind of sparked that, okay, I can do this. I think I know what's going on. And then I found wonderful people. One of my best friends through Davis, Emily Goodell, who now has a winery and is doing her business in Traverse City, Michigan, really took me under her wing. And I didn't have a car, so she would, drive me around. We went to Napa together. She really helped me learn and explore about the industry. My other colleagues as well, Jose, Christina, we found a really good community. And then the professors at Davis, I have to give them a huge nod. They were so supportive of whatever I needed to do, helped with sending out emails when it was time for internships and scholarship applications. So I received a lot of support during my time with the department.
That is so great to hear. I'm really, really happy to hear that. That's the stories I want to hear more of. That people are getting the support they need, finding good friends. Wine people are generally great, so it's not that hard to make friends in wine, but it is hard to feel comfortable in wine. So I'm so happy that worked for you. I want to touch back a little bit to your parents because I love this story. You've said that your parents weren't very convinced about this career choice of going into wine. And you said that originally they thought you were joking when you said you were going to apply to UC Davis. So, I'm guessing they feel pretty happy about it now that you're very successful. So, you know, in the early days they weren't so sure. How do they feel about it now?
Well, now they're both retired and they get to come and enjoy their retirement in Napa. I would say they're pretty convinced about the opportunity and kind of the decision, if you will. When I decided to make this change, or when I decided to choose this direction, if you will. It just wasn't anything they'd ever heard of. There was the issue of the unknown. And I've talked about this before as well, but my father, when I sat down and explained to them what I wanted to do, one of the first questions he asked me was, well, do women even do this? And, at that time in 2008, I thought that was a ridiculous question because I had been raised in an environment where there was no gender divide. My parents treated both me and my sister very normally. And so for him to suddenly ask me that question felt very regressive. And I'm kind of glad that he did, though, because it put me on the path of discovery of women winemakers. So I've been following those career paths, and the women that have really defined the industry, not just in California but globally as well. And so it gave me, if just a direction. It gave me a really good direction of how to do it and when to do it. And so I think they saw that clarity starting to develop in me. And then when I was applying to schools and universities, I was getting through. I received some scholarships to help assist. So the financial ask was a bit easier. And they had doubts, but they said, I think they trusted me to know to exit if it wasn't going to work out. So I was happy. I was excited that they gave me the opportunity to at least explore it. And I'll never regret that I did.
What good parents you have. That's great to hear. I have six children, and I've always tried to encourage them to do everything and try everything. But not all parents feel that way. So, and especially, from other cultures, it can be difficult. So what good parents? You should call them up tonight and tell them that you love them.
Yeah, they're both in academia. My father is a scientist. My mother has taught physics to graduate level students her whole career. So I think what has always been the tenet of every conversation of ours has just been logic and argument. And so if you can make your case, then you've made your case, and it's as simple as that. So I was lucky that they were able to keep the emotional aspects of this decision aside and say, well, it's a good school and it's a good program. We did our due diligence. They asked a lot of people. I had to build a case. I mean, I made a PowerPoint presentation of women and wine to show my father. So it was not a simple, okay, let's go and do it. I had to really almost lawyer up, if you will, to be able to pursue this decision. But I think it put me on the right path when it came to understanding what I was getting myself into.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, and it worked for you because
It did.
after UC Davis, you worked for some really big names, Louis Martini, Stag's Leap, Dalla Valle, and you went on for international experiences. You've been to New Zealand and to Beaune in Burgundy. So, who were some of the mentors? You've talked about following women in wine. I also obviously am very women in wine are very near and dear to my heart. So, who were some of your mentors in those days? And, how did your confidence grow over those years after you graduated?
Well, I would say my earliest mentor was Linda Bisson at Davis,
Good choice.
and I worked in her lab. So my master's thesis, the project that I did and the research that I did was under her tutelage and in her lab. And Linda was ahead of her times, where she was already talking about unconscious biases, and she was talking about DEI in a language that not a lot of people were speaking in at that point of time. And so not only did I have a bit of a learning, I mean, huge learning when it came to winemaking, I also had someone who was talking to me about the people and what the culture of wine can really be, especially in a region like Napa, which in my opinion is still very much up and coming. This is still very much a young wine region, like you said, in the grand scheme of things. So I give her a lot of credit for opening my mind into what should the conversation be. And then thereafter, I kind of followed a few different, just kind of did the hemisphere hopping to get a lot of experience. And I actually was in the pursuit of Pinot Noir for the longest time, which is why I went to Burgundy and then down to, New Zealand. And then when I came back to Napa was really when I started working with Cabernet Sauvignon and more of those Bordeaux varieties, which now I've really found to love. But I found a few other women along the way as well that really supported the journey. Catherine Yankovic, who was down in New Zealand, was a winemaker at St. Clair, and she really took me under her wing. And and with her, it was more of a process-based learning. What are your quality control points? What are your points at the winery that you really have to focus when you're making wine or when you're making decisions for the creative aspect? So she was huge in that. And then through the more recent years, I think the job that I got at Dalla Valle and working under Naoko was probably the most defining moment for me because, here was someone who has been steering a brand for many years, especially after her husband passed away. She has kind of been the sole proprietor, and now, of course, her daughter is a part of it. But she was an Asian woman who had really found a position for herself, but wasn't resting on her laurels by any means. She's a very active member of the community. She gives back so much in terms of donations and philanthropic work. And so I think in terms of defining what the image would be for me to grow up to, Naoko Dalla Valle very much kind of holds the North Star in that respect.
That's so nice, and I'm really happy to see Maya coming up the way she is.
Yeah.
I also very much appreciate her mother, but it's lovely to see Maya coming up too. So I'm glad you got to work with them. Very
Yeah.
special place. So your first really big job was at Signorello in 2019, when you became the youngest female winemaker to lead a Napa winery, as well as one of just a handful of Indian winemakers in California. So it was a tough one. The winery had burned down in the 2017 fires, which was really horrible. I remember seeing the pictures of it on the news when that happened. And you came in to rebuild with the owner. So, what was it like starting basically from the ground up? Because you didn't even have the old winery records, and everything was lost. The hard drives, everything. So, how did you figure out where to start?
That was a tough one, honestly. Like, I came in and, we knew there was a lot of opportunity to rethink, if you will. And we affectionately called that phase Signorello 2.0 because Ray really did give us the kind of the blank slate, if you will. He had a very clear image of the kind of wines he wanted to make and the winery he wanted to build and what he wanted the estate to be like moving forward. But um, it's tough to come into a property that has that kind of history and legacy and not have a lot of information of what had been done previously. So one of the first things that I said to him was that we needed a few experts on our team, and so bringing in Steve Mathiasen on the viticultural side of things for the estate vineyards, and then bringing in Celia Welsh as a consulting winemaker was a part of building that team to really reassess and rethink. And I think they were the most wonderful, excellent choices because, Steve is obviously such an amazing viticulturalist and with so much focus on premier viticulture, but he's also a winemaker and he has his own brand. And the same thing with Celia is, she's such a noted winemaker, but she's also had her own brand and she's very much involved on the vineyard side of things. So the conversations that the three of us could have were always very wholesome and looking not just at the granular, but at the broad picture, the big picture as well. And so we kind of we took it in our stride, if you will, and we said, let's just pretend like we don't know anything about this property. And of course, Ray had a lot of experience and he has been actively involved in the winemaking process. So he could tell us a lot about, the blocks that they preferred or the kind of wines that they made from the eastern versus the western side of the estate. So we had a little bit of that information, but we just went in and said, let's pretend like we don't know anything and see what we can do. So it started out with a lot of small lots and getting to know the property and remapping the blocks and just kind of starting to build data and build information that way. And it was really fun. I think we discovered aspects of the estate that, when you've been doing the same thing for a while, you just kind of assume stuff. And I think we found some really cool micro climates and blocks and special features about the property. And I was excited to see all those come together in the form of just updated brands, a new focus for the overall estate, but then just improvement when it came to the fruit quality in the estate vineyards as well.
It's a great story because it must have been so overwhelming, and it was really your first big job. And as you said, it was a legacy vineyard already, and to come in at that point where everything's just devastated, and to sort of get your hands dirty, get in there and get it going. I think that's a wonderful story. I want to talk about the rebuilding process too, because I know it was a long one, but it's such an interesting one because I know you built caves into a hillside on the property to create a cellar for the barrels and for some of the winemaking process. And all the materials that were used were non-flammable, and you put in a whole bunch of other anti-fire features built into the project. So all of this is so important for the sustainability of Napa. And it's still a huge risk for California winemakers, obviously. So um, I want to ask you what you think about smoke taint from the fires, and fire prevention and the future of winemaking in that area, because not everybody has the money to build the winery that you built. Um, what do you see happening with smoke taint and the future and fire prevention for the area? What do you think?
Well, it is, I think it's probably one of the most pressing issues for California, at least for our specific region, because there was a while there between 14 to 2016 where we kind of thought we were untouchable a little bit, even though there were clearly fires happening around us, but they were never close enough to be of significance. And so I think in Napa, we kind of just sat like a frog in the well thinking, oh, this would never happen to us. And then 17 caught us completely off guard, right? And since then, the threat of a fire has been ever so prevalent every harvest. And then 2020 showed us what that devastation could really mean. So I think it's a significant issue. It's something to be very cognizant and to know about. One of the things that we did in 2020, because 2017, everyone was so caught off guard, no one really knew what to do. And the knee jerk reaction was to just not use a lot of the fruit that was still on the vine. But the 2017 fire was also significantly later in the season. So I hate to say it this way, but maybe the damage wasn't quite as profound. Whereas in 2020, with the two fires happening right at the peak of the growing season, now you really just had to figure out what was going to happen, right? And you're right, a lot of producers decided to not make wine that year, but that's not a viable economic solution down the road. And so we spent the 2020 vintage at Signorello because I also had an emotional attachment. We had not just been farming these estate vineyards through the whole growing season with my in-house crew of about seven amazing people, but we had been doing it through a global pandemic. So I just kind of was emotionally attached to these grapes, and I just, the idea of just dropping them on the ground didn't make sense. And fortunately, Ray gave us the option of using them for analysis and study. So we did a lot of testing of grape samples progressively through the fires just to see what the pickup would be amongst different varieties. And then we tested the actual fermentations as well to see what that pickup is. And it was, I wouldn't say that it gave you a clear game plan, but it at least gave us a clear idea of when that quality barrier actually comes into play. Like, what are the numbers at which smoke taint is a real perceivable issue in your wine? And at what numbers is it something that may affect a wine in terms of maybe it's not as generous and as open, but it's not perceivable by the consumer, and it's definitely not a health risk by any means to consume a wine of that nature. So those were numbers no one even knew. Like, no one even knew how to define smoke taint. So to have that threshold in your mind of understanding, okay, Cabernet could handle up to these many days of a smoke event. But then what does that smoke event even mean in terms of air quality index, volatile phenols? I mean, it's a pretty complex and void subject. So I think just in 2020, what was very important for me was one, to be able to define for myself what smoke taint is, and at what point do I say, no, we're not making wine from these grapes. These grapes have been compromised. But it was also trying to understand, well, what are the possibilities if a grape is compromised? Because something like a red, could you press off early and make it into a rosé or make it into a much lighter red without extended skin maceration? And I think that there are some very creative solutions that could exist, but then you have to also think about the marketability of those solutions, right? Napa has created for itself a reputation for these big age-worthy Cabernets. So for a property like, in this case, Signorello, to suddenly turn around and say, hey, we have made a lighter style Cabernet, or we just made a Cabernet Rosé, that may not always be the message you want to send out to consumers. So it can be a very complicated decision, but there are creative solutions. We did a lot of things about rinsing grapes right after bringing them into the vineyard, using ozone to treat them to mitigate some of the smoke taint flavors, thinking about specialized cooperages and barrel formats to be able to think about that, the autolysis of glycol that happens later in the age of the wine. So I think there's options available for us. So if it should happen in the future, that the knee jerk reaction will not be, let's just drop everything on the ground. But at the same time, there's a lot of stuff that we can do to mitigate. So creating those fire boundaries, making sure what the borders of your property look like. Are there aspects that could instigate a fire? Like, are you basically leaving flammable material that would propagate a fire should it arise? And in drier seasons, that's a huge challenge. So, and we try to bring in as sustainable of solutions as we could. So, starting um, our own little tribe of cattle was one of them. So we started to bring sheep to the property, and during the spring they would be in the vineyards mowing our cover crop, and during the rest of the year we would send them out to the overall estate to keep the brush low, to really mow around the edges of the vineyard so that if there's a fire there's just not a clear path into the property, if you will. And then thinking about long-term solutions, high pressure water systems to be able to wet a certain area. I think pre 2020, no one was prepared. If anything, wineries had garden hoses on the outsides of their buildings, and that's not going to fight a fire. But now we were thinking about what's the right kind of fire pump, what's the kind of pressure you need to actually fight a fire. So I think we're making a lot of progress, and I give good kudos to the Napa Valley vintners because they are spending a good amount of resources to educate vintners about fire mitigation, about policies, about grants from the state that will help us, do a lot of these things, because there are financial implications to a lot of this work as well.
Yeah, for sure. But that's a really positive message. I think probably the most positive message I've heard in a while, and I've done some tasting, technical tastings with smoke taint wines to see if they're evolving in the bottle and not. And the news there isn't so positive. So I love everything that you're doing. That does sound super positive. And as you said, the message may not be exactly what you want it, but it's a positive message. It's moving forward and not just giving up or as you said, cutting all the grapes, leaving them on the ground. So I'm really happy to hear that some of that I did not expect to hear. So I'm really, really glad about that. It makes me really happy. So you know, after 6 years at Signorello, you moved on to a new position. And just a couple of months ago, you've only been there since May. So you're the general manager at Napa Wine Co. and the winemaker at Ghost Block Wines. And you say that you focus on luxury and sustainable wine production and crafting wines with purpose and precision. So I just want to talk about this philosophy. I really like this philosophy. You've said you thrive in the intersection of science and sustainability and artistry. So, what does all of this mean to your work at Napa Wine Co. and Ghost Block now? How are you putting this actually very cool philosophy into practice in your new job?
Wow, that's a loaded question, Cynthia. Um, Well, I want to talk a little bit about Napa Wine Company because I think the history of this place will help maybe understand why I thought this was a very exciting opportunity. So Napa Wine Company is bonded winery number 9 in the state of California and one of the first custom crush facilities that existed here. It was the original building was the Inglenook facility before Mr. Hoxie purchased it along with his family and kind of made it a cooperative custom crush, which is now a custom crush facility. The number of winemakers and the number of actual brick and mortar facilities that now exist in Napa Valley that found their start at Napa Wine Company is tremendous. And that list of wineries and winemakers just makes me really smile to know that somewhere along that journey, I am also able to associate myself with them. And we still have some really incredible winemakers that make wine here and that continue to use our facility. So, um, one of the things about the Hoxie and the Palissa families, they're now fifth generation. They like to call themselves farmers because they've been stewards of the land. They have about 600 acres of vineyards between Oakville and Yountville, and they've been farming that with a CCOF organic certification for 30 years. I believe this was their 30th year of farming organically. And the fruit that I get to now work with is not just been, we don't have just this beautiful age on a lot of our blocks that has been farmed responsibly, but they're also open to things like our 2025 vintage is 100% dry farmed when it
Wow.
comes to a lot of the blocks that I get to make wine with. And they're constantly trying to push the envelope of what it makes of what it defines to farm and make wine here in Napa. So for me, I thought the biggest difference between Napa Wine Company and where I was at Signorello is scale. And I've never done things on scale. So that was a huge challenge for me is how do you, continue to craft excellent wines while thinking about scalability. And I always think about, winemakers like Nate Weiss, who was at Silver Oak that really defined what quality luxury winemaking can mean at scale when you do it sustainably. And they of course built beautiful facilities to define it, but how do you take a historic facility and improve it and, continuously strategically develop it so that it continues to stay here for the next 4 decades like it has been for the last four. So, I don't. I think that might have answered some of your questions. They've made, they have a Sauvignon Blanc and a Cabernet Sauvignon that I am now crafting under Ghost Block. Both the Cabernets come from single vineyards, even though they may not be designated as that on the label. So I hope to do it. And so there's a lot of thought into where the fruit's coming from, how it's being made, and what the story is that we're telling through the wine. I love the history component of this place because I think, especially with where Napa is as young as it is, it's important for us to recognize and know our journey to understand where this region wants to go in the future. A lot of it has been through comparisons with Bordeaux, but Napa is a very different region than Bordeaux. So I very much disagree with that comparison. And so I think for me to continue to define my vision and how I'd like to contribute to the industry here, understanding what the back has been is important as well. The team at Napa Wine Company is, big, and a lot of our team members have been here for many years. So they bring to the table a lot of experience and thought and an openness to think about maybe more modern solutions. And, we're looking at things like recovery of water and filtering lees for maximum juice production. So there's a lot of different things that we can do, but we can do it not just for our own brands, but for other clients as well. So, from a sustainability point of view, we won't be touching just our own family brands. Hopefully, as we continue to build on stuff here, it will be a broader, more wider reach to overall winemaking in Napa as well.
That sounds amazing, and the challenge is big, but you're so calm and so ready for it. Like you've clearly got a plan in mind, so I like this.
Yeah, yeah, it's easy. I think it's not easy because there's a lot of strategy that will be involved, and I'm constantly double checking and cross examining. And this is our first harvest here, and it's already been such a learning opportunity of how things are done and how we operate, but to also then see that this is a facility where so many different winemakers come in to make the wine they want. And for me, that's the coolest thing about this place, is we are not ban we're not forcing anyone to make wine one way. We're saying, come in, use the facility whichever way you want to, tell us how you want to do it, and let's make wine your way. And I think that's pretty unique. So I'm having a lot of fun. I'm getting to know a lot of different winemaking styles and varieties and areas and regions, while constantly thinking about what that will mean for Ghost Block and its future. And it's very exciting.
That sounds incredible. I can't wait to see what you do with this. I'm going to keep on you. I want to talk about some of the other things you're doing too, because sustainability is not all just about farming practice. It's about people too. And you've said that great wines are made in the vineyard and nurtured by a strong team and brought to life through collaboration and storytelling. And I completely believe in that 100%. And you've said you're committed to fostering inclusivity and innovation and sustainability in winemaking. So tell me what you're doing in your work at Wine Unify and Batonage, because they're both nonprofits. They're both sustaining a lot of underrepresented communities, and this is very important, I think.
Yeah, and thank you for asking that question, because I feel like, that's been a part of the wine industry that maybe we've tried to put a cover over it for many years in the name of history and tradition, but not necessarily really acknowledging the elephant in the room. And so I'll talk about Wine Unify first, because that kind of uh, it came about as a direct reaction to what was happening in the country in 2020, especially with the whole George Floyd thing that really rocked, I think, a lot of people to the core when it came to like what is going on here and where do we stand on a lot of stuff. And so Mary Margaret, Dylan Proctor, and Martin Reyes came together, and they said, let's put a group together that really thinks about what the wine industry is doing and who we're encouraging to bring into the room. And so I've been very fortunate to be on that board since the beginning. And our wonderful Alicia Towns Franken is now the executive director for the organization.
She's a good friend. I love her.
Yeah, and she's doing incredible stuff, with what we're able to do. So the whole tenet for Wine Unify is to provide educational opportunities, because we really do believe that the way to bring people into the room is to provide them education and to give them the right foot forward into the industry. And a lot of times it's access. It's, are you able to financially afford this wine certification course, or are you able to financially afford to taste the wines you need to pass a test? And so that's the roadblock that we're really trying to address. And since 2020, gosh, I believe we've given around over almost 400 scholarships to different recipients, all from underrepresented communities. We have our first few candidates starting on the level 3 and level 4 diploma for WSET. And the goal for the organization is really to have our first person of color master of wine. And I think, every year we're getting closer and closer to it. But the one thing that is echoed in every meeting of ours is, a lot of us kind of came, like you mentioned, and I hate saying it that way, but in more isolated worlds, trying to break it into this industry. And I think a huge part of what we're trying to do with Wine Unify is to create and have that community for people that want to come in the industry that maybe some of us didn't have and had to build ourselves. And it's been really cool to see the interactions and see some of our award recipients get full-time positions and then open up the table for the next group of amazing people that have come through it. So very proud of that work that continues to happen with Wine Unify. And Batonage was a organization, founded by Stevie Stachonis and Sarah Bray. They had their first forum in, gosh, I think it was 2018, and I went to it in person, and it was just so empowering to walk. it was literally in someone's backyard, and 200 something women gathered, and no one expected those many women to gather, but it clearly highlighted a need that women are not feeling like they're receiving the kind of support that they should, or have the kind of opportunities they should in the wine industry. And so the philosophy for Batanage is stirring up the conversation. So it's all about talking. It's not just about talking about the issues, but really thinking about how can we act, what's action oriented, what's positive, and what's an inclusive solution for everyone. And that's something that I'm very, very proud of. And the mentorship program came about just through that. It came about through a conversation, and it was like, well, what can we do? And the idea was, well, let's create the right channels for people to network and build. And since then, we've through the mentorship program, there's a committee of 7 amazing women that head each area of focus. So we provide interactions across cellar and production, viticulture, retail, hospitality, sales and marketing, sales and distribution, marketing and communication, and then wine business. And we've grown this program every year. There's different levels at which the mentors and mentees can interact, and the idea is to build channels, is to help women get in touch with the other women that can help them, to help inspire, to help learn. I found a lot of learning from what I used to call informational interviews, just going up and saying, hey, how did you do this, and why did you make this decision? And sometimes that can trigger a thought. So we try and build it as organically as we can, as in the mentorship program. And we're in year 5 now, and we fostered almost over 2,500 interactions between mentors and mentees. So it takes a village. It's a lot of amazing women that come together and do the work to bring people together, and it's been very. I think for me, the work with Wine Unify and Batonage has really helped feed the soul. Chicken soup for the soul when it comes to being in the wine industry. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I know exactly what you mean. I do some mentoring for Curious Vines, and I teach a lot of young people as well. So yeah, chicken chicken soup for the soul. I love it, and it's. I think it is really important. I am very serious about those sorts of projects that are going on, and you are lucky to be in the States where there are many more of them. We have very few of them in Italy, and actually fairly few of them in Europe overall. I think the culture is just different. But the good work that you're doing will get more and more of those students traveling around the world, and the message will spread. And so I think what you're doing is foundational, and yeah, I think it will definitely grow. So um, you've done some more exciting stuff. You chaired the premier Napa Wine Valley auction last year, and now nominated to a new young leadership cohort aimed at furthering the prestigious Napa brand. And we've heard all kinds of tales of woe. Young people aren't drinking wine, and new consumers want no and low alcohol beverages, and lots of other gloom and doom stories. You're only in your 30s. You're one of these young people, so your perspective is pretty close to this group of people that we're talking about. I'm not sure I'm convinced about all of the news that we hear. So how are you engaging with new and young consumers, and how are you promoting Napa as a prestige brand in a way that makes sense to young people in the current environment?
Um, I think a part of really helping the wine industry move forward is authentic story building. And it's not just the stock images of people in the vineyard, or, talking about the same pairing of steak with Cabernet, or, chocolate with Zin, and it's really about expanding that horizon, or expanding the scope of the conversation, if you will. And what I've found is that it's not that young people don't want to drink wine. It's that if they are going to invest in the experience of coming to Napa, of going to these tasting rooms, they want to hear something that's authentic and something that's real. So those are the points at which I find the connection happens the best. And so when you're out there and you're telling the real story of what that harvest was like and what it meant to make wine. I mean, I used to travel the market for Signorello quite a bit, and every time you told a story about where the property was and what we're doing and how we're moving forward, it always made a connection with the people. And so I think staying true to that and not just necessarily glamorizing the industry as something that it's not. I would go around for my general sales meetings and show pictures of the reality of the cut up hands and Chloe, my sweet Australian shepherd that comes with me everywhere, and we're very fortunate to be in an industry that is also such a lifestyle choice. Like, I don't think a lot of us in the wine industry really realize how fortunate it is to have employment in a place that not just allows you to stay in such a beautiful region, but helps you to continue to stay connected with Mother Nature. You're walking the dirt every day, and you're keeping yourself so inspired when it comes to creativity of like, what kind of wine do I want to make? And I think telling that, saying that story, and giving that journey a voice has been something that I found has connected really well. And the when you think about the younger generation coming in, the range of experiences that are available to them is insane. I mean, it's not just from travel point of view, it's what they can see on social media. So to be able to strike a chord, you have to have something that cuts through the noise, if you will. And I think talking about wine in a more diverse, just open way, people ask me what my favorite pairing is, and I talk about it with reference to Indian food, and I kind of like to tailor it depending on who I'm speaking to. And wine can find a room on any table. The whole point of wine is to have conversations. It's a social, impetus, if you will. It's meant to bring people together in community and strike up conversations about agriculture and the cultural arts and all of this kind of stuff. And I don't think putting wine into the little window of just European experiences is the way for us to continue to grow the industry.
Yeah, I think that is a fantastic perspective, actually. Um, and you are the poster woman of of sensible young, interested in wine, very knowledgeable, very grounded in what you're doing. It's clearly, this is something that you're super passionate about. It's consuming your every living, breathing, waking moment. I can tell. So I love that passion, and I think you're right. Storytelling and connecting with people, especially including food. I do a couple of events a year where I pair Italian wines with foreign foods because I'm the same. I'm sick of hearing what wine I'm supposed to be drinking with, pasta. So uh, it's a good outreach, and I think it is much more real. People don't eat the way they used to. People are vegan, they're vegetarian, they're, all sorts of different things. And I think we have to move with the times with that. And I think connecting that way on a really personal level is, it's hard to do. It's like hand selling every bottle of wine, but it's definitely the place to start from. And I love that. So what's on the cards for the next couple of years for you, Priyanka? I mean, you just got a new job, so what are the goals? Where are you going to be? What are you going to be doing when I call you back in
Oh
2030?
boy. Well, a huge part of my current journey right now is I'm a young mom. I have two young kids. My daughters are
Oh wow, congrats.
Thank you. My daughters are 2 and 1. So I think really understanding motherhood and the balance of that with work is something I'm striving. I think about it daily. What kind of a role, or what kind of a environment will my children see in terms of, how I define success. And so I hope by 2030, I found some kind of answer to it. Um, I'm very excited about the opportunity here at Napa Wine Company, and I have a lot of kind of ideas of what we can do to continue to be a voice that has really been a step up point for up and coming winemakers. And they've done it through the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. Labels have come out of here, brands have come out of this place, and like you said, we are constantly talking about a woe and doom and gloom period in the industry, but I do think there's a lot of opportunity because there's no lack of talented, amazing winemakers that should be given an opportunity to express themselves. And so what can we at Napa Wine Company do to help encourage that is something that I think about daily. So hopefully by 2030, I've had some of those things figured out, and yeah, continuing to make really great wines in Napa. I think right now a lot of my brain is just about trying to get sleep between harvest and my two kids. So once we're over this season of life, who knows what will strike inspiration at that
That's
point.
great. Thank you so much. This is such a fun interview. I really, really
Oh,
appreciate
thank
your
you.
time. I know you're so busy, and it was just very uplifting to talk to you and get your perspective.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for listening, and remember to tune in next Wednesday when I'll be chatting with another fascinating guest. Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world and the only one with a daily show. Tune in every day and discover all our different shows. You can find us at ItalianWinePodcast.com, SoundCloud, Spotify, Himalaya, or wherever you get your pods.